Hello, Miss Slenczynska. Hello, Ruth. Can you hear me now?
I'm so glad to meet Polish people.
It's a great privilege for us, Ruth,
All right.
to talk to you. The true legend of the piano, that a pianist whose career spans from the times of Rachmaninoff and Hoffman up to today. And I would like to ask you about your new CD that is due to be released in March by Dwójka. Would you tell us, please, why you decided to make this recording just now, after some 6 years from since your last recordings for Dwójka? Why did you keep us so long?
Well, someone in Australia asked me to record again. Now, why is something I don't really understand. But he asked me, could I record again? And I thought to myself, why not? I never stopped playing. And when I continue playing, I keep making discoveries. I keep finding new things. So I do not play now the way I used to play. Of course, I am old and I no longer have the technique. I no longer have the strength physically to do what I did when I was young. But I have understanding. I have pleasure in what I do, and I enjoy people. This is one way of communicating with people. So why not? I have my way of playing. And if you like it, this is wonderful. If you don't like it, I am sorry.
The program of the CD comprises the pieces by Chopin, mostly, Rachmaninoff, Bach, Grieg, and Debussy. Could you tell us what was the idea of this choice?
I think the idea was mainly this man in Australia, because I played many things that he did not take. For instance, I played a Beethoven sonata. He did not take it because it was too long. Well, I played something else he did not take. For what reasons, I don't know. But I played many things and he chose what he wanted, and that's what came out.
Yeah, and this CD also is connected with your life, my life in music. So would you please reveal a bit the story to us? As far as I know, you come from a musical family. Your name, Slenczynska, sounds rather familiar for a Polish listener. Were your parents born in Poland? Do you have any connections with our country?
Of course I do. My mother's folks came from Białystok. My grandfather said he had the best sweet shop in Białystok. And he married a girl who belonged to a dance society. And he said, I got my talent from her. And she was from Białystok. I have never been to Białystok. I don't know what the place looks like, but he evidently came to the United States. And by that time, his wife was no longer with him, but he had children, and I am his granddaughter. My father came from a family in Gdansk, Danzig. It's a famous big seaport. And the name Slenczynski, he said, meant that his family specialized in herring fishing, that they owned fishing boats and they fished for herring, and that was their profession. So there is no music there. And he and his younger brother were the two youngest boys, and his father married again, and the woman he married did not want so many children to care for. And so the two youngest ones ran away from home. And he and his brother were the two youngest ones. They left home. And my father had a love for music. And so he tried to get to Vienna and to the Vienna Conservatory of Music, which was the finest music school in the world at that time. My uncle Kalman had a pair of hands that were miraculous. He could fix anything. And he went to Australia, and he found an Australian lady and got married and settled in Brisbane. And so these two boys escaped Poland. They left, and eventually my father wound up in America, and he found my mother. My mother was born in New Jersey, and he found my mother, and they got married, and they moved to California. They wanted to move to a warmer climate. New Jersey was too cold. And so they were thinking of either Virginia or California. And they chose California because it was further away from their families. My father did not want to have a lot of family around. He had gotten used to dictating his own way, and he wanted to continue living in that way. So they lived in California, and that's where I came.
So this is where you were born, in Sacramento, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And I was told your father was really an eminent violinist. Is it true that he was once a headmaster, a director of the Warsaw Conservatory of Music?
I don't know.
Mm.
I doubt it. He definitely knew how to play the violin well enough to teach people who did not know how to play, because he had students. And because he had students, I used to watch by the sliding doors to see what happened in a lesson. I was very, very small, but interested in hearing the music.
And you wanted to play the piano?
Yes.
And was it your father that you had the first lesson of the piano with?
Well, my father had a lot of confidence in his own knowledge and decided if I didn't want the violin, that I wanted the piano. All right, he's going to teach me the piano. And he taught me what he could. And then he took me to this piano teacher and listened to what she had to say and tried to teach it to me. And he took me to that piano teacher, tried to teach me what that piano teacher taught. Then he would take me to another piano teacher, always trying to raise the standard of what I was learning. And in that way, I learned.
Ruth, your biography is full of illustrious names of greatest celebrated pianists like Alfred Cortot, Egon Petri, Arthur Schnabel, Joseph Hoffmann, and Sergei Rachmaninoff. So who arranged these meetings? Was it your father who arranged you the auditions with these great pianists?
Yes, he pushed me in front of every pianist he could. And this is how I learned. From each pianist, I learned this and this and this. And another pianist would teach me this. Another pianist would teach me another way of doing things. So I learned many, many, many things, varied things.
And your career is full of spectacular moments, really, when you debuted at the age of 4, then shortly after your debut in Berlin, and few years later in Paris with the orchestra. Was it in Paris when you met Alfred Cortot?
Well, my father just took me everywhere to play. And I played, and he stayed on top of me for 8-9 hours every day to make sure I played. He pushed.
It must have been a very tough experience, really, this severe, strict discipline and the practice regime must have been very stressful for a child of your age.
Well, I learned how to play, and I played.
And tell us about your meeting with Alfred Cortot. How did the lessons look like?
Mr. Cortot came to San Francisco to play a concert. And at that time, the lady who was helping me to learn to play was a Mrs. Kennedy. And she went to the hotel where Mr. Cortot was staying and told him about me and could she bring me to play for him? And he said yes. And so she brought me and I played for him. And he said, it's the first time I heard the word bravo. And he said that if I came to Paris, he had a school of music there and I could learn how to really play the piano there. So my father had this idea, he's going to take me to Europe and I'm going to learn from big European masters. And this is how he formed his idea, that he was going to make me learn from the very best masters in Europe. But before we went to Paris, he wanted to take me to Berlin because the best teacher I had was in California at that time, was Gunnar Johansson, and he was Danish, and he had been a student of a man named Egon Petri in Berlin.
Great student of Ferruccio Busoni.
Yes. And he was a famous piano teacher in Berlin. Egon Petri was. And so my father had a great deal of respect for the teachers in Berlin. And through Gunnar Johansson, who was a student of Egon Petri, I had an opening. And this is how we went to Berlin. My father, my mother, me, and my two younger sisters all traveled to Berlin so that I could study. And I remember it was on the Victoria Luisa Platz, the studio of Busoni. And I met Frau Busoni. Mr. Petri was teaching in the studio of her late husband. And this is where I had my first lesson in Europe, was with Egon Petri. And he was very, very strict on technique and on scales. And I had had a very good background on that from Madame Vengerova at the Curtis Institute, who made me play scales, each hand alone, 4 octaves. And this is where Mr. Petri took over and decided to give me my first prelude and fugue of Bach. I had already had the inventions. And he started me on prelude and fugue number 1, prelude and fugue number 2, and so on, so that I started on the preludes and fugues of Bach. Of course, that's huge volume of music, and he gave me other things too. And whenever I learned a piece pretty well, then my father would take me to the Bechstein store in Berlin where they sold pianos, and I would try my new piece out on this piano. And so in this way, one time, there was a person in the store in the next room, and he asked the person at the Bechstein store, who is that playing? The Bechstein store, oh, it's a little kid. Next room, you want to, I would like to see a little kid who plays like that. And it was Arthur Schnabel.
Oh, great. How old were you then?
I was 6 years old. This is how I met Mr. Schnabel. And he gave me my first Mozart sonata to learn. And it was a lesson that I still can remember because he spoke about every note in this Mozart sonata. He knew it so perfectly. And when I give a lesson today, I still try to model it after that lesson with Mr. Schnabel. It was such a complete lesson of that sonata. He knew every note so perfectly. And he made up little tunes, little words to go with the tunes in that sonata. For instance, in that Mozart sonata, there was a place that goes dee-da-dum, bum, ba-da-dum, bum, da-dee, bum, bum, ba-dum, da-da-da-da-dum, bum, da-da-da-da-dum. Well, he made up words. He said, eine Blume, which means a flower, a flower. He had little words that went with the tune and helped you to understand it. And this is what I still do when I play something. I try to give it a natural feeling.
So did he focus on classical repertoire mainly with you? Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Arthur?
Yes, that's it. I learned the Italian concerto of Bach at that time. I played my first concert in Berlin. It was very curious. I played in a place called the Bach Saal. And somebody in the audience, knowing that I was 6 years old because it was advertised, a girl 6 years old is going to play this program. And everybody came to it. It was a packed house because my parents told everybody about it. And the butcher from whom we bought meat, the lady in the bake shop where we bought our breads and cakes, everybody came to the concert in order to see a little girl 6 years old play. And the place was filled. When I took my bow at the end of the concert, somebody tried to hand me a doll. It was the most gorgeous, beautiful little French doll you could imagine. And of course, I was overjoyed. I wanted this doll. And my father came on stage, pushed the doll back to the audience and said, "Weg mit die Puppe," away with the doll. He did not want me to have a doll to play with. The piano would be what I had to play with, not a doll. A profession already at the age of 6. Then,
yes, it sounds you didn't have very normal childhood. It was full of practice, full of concert regime, exercise and exercise. Is it true, as you were then famous for your stunning technique, is it true that you had to play all 24 etudes of Chopin before you had breakfast every morning?
yes, I learned them. And after I learned them, that was my warm-up exercise for the day. I was a teenager by then, maybe 16, maybe 17. I kept adding the next etude, and then the next etude, and then the next etude. And this is how I learned the 24 etudes. But when I had an opportunity to record much later, I had done this for so many years and for so long. I felt so comfortable with these etudes that when they asked me, "What do you want to record?" I said, "I'll record the 24 etudes of Chopin." And I did. That was my very first venture with Decca.
Yes, I think it was at the beginning of the 50s when you resumed your career after some break.
After I did these etudes, you see, when you do a thing a certain number of times, you find a little attractive thing to do here that you add to your interpretation. And then a few days later, you find a little attractive thing to do there to add to your interpretation. So it kept changing and evolving, getting a little bit more personal all the time. So that by the time I did all the etudes, they were in pretty good shape. I had been doing this for years. And after they came out and were well received, then Mr. Israel Horowitz, who was the director of A&R, Artist and Repertoire, at Decca in New York, said, "You are a Chopin specialist." I said, "I'm not a Chopin specialist. I play Bach, I play Beethoven, I play Mozart, Haydn." With a name like Slenczynska and your Chopin etudes debut, you are a Chopin specialist. Now, next thing we need the preludes. Well, after the etudes, the preludes were comparatively easy to do. So I did those, and I filled out little corners of the preludes, I think, with the 4 impromptus. And then I did the ballades. And gradually, I did do a lot of Chopin. I did the scherzi, I did the sonatas. I think I did also, I did some concertos. I don't know what I did, but I did a lot of Chopin.
So it looks, you play, you know all the pieces by Chopin, and most of them you recorded for Decca.
Yeah, and I did extra pieces of Chopin. I did the Fantasy, I think, did the Berceuse, but all different places. They asked me to record. So I recorded in Japan. I recorded, there are some live recordings that I did of concerts. I don't know what, but there are lots of them.
Ruth, could you say that some of your great teachers, your great professors, the legendary pianist, was the most influential for your Chopin?
Well, I did the best I could. I played as well as I could at all times. I still worked very, very hard. I tried to keep my technique as good as I possibly could. That's the result.
It's obvious for me when I listen to your new recordings, but I'd like to ask you still about Rachmaninoff, about meeting Rachmaninoff. Was it true that he was so fond of you and your talent that he gave you a necklace with a Fabergé egg?
I have never taken it off.
You've got it. Is it the necklace from Rachmaninoff that
Yes.
you were showing to us?
It is blue.
Yes, yes, we can see it. So he must be really fond of you and your talent.
I have put it on a chain and I never took it off.
How did you meet Rachmaninoff? Tell us about this, please.
Well, I was on concert tour. I was a child. I was 9 years old. And I was in California playing in the city of Sacramento. And my father received a telegram from the manager of Philharmonic Auditorium in Los Angeles, asking whether I would be free on a particular date to replace Rachmaninoff. Rachmaninoff was supposed to play at Philharmonic Auditorium. The place was sold out. The manager did not want to give back the money to all the people who bought seats. And so he replaced Rachmaninoff with me, a concert by me. And we went down to Los Angeles on that date. My father looked at Rachmaninoff's program, saw that Carnival of Schumann was on it. And I was practicing on Carnival at that time. He said, well, this is a good time for you to try it out. And so I played Carnival on my program. And everybody was satisfied. It was a big success. And the manager paid my father. The audience was happy. And Rachmaninoff found out that the concert was not canceled. He was replaced by a 9-year-old girl.
It's incredible. 9-year-old girl playing instead of Rachmaninoff.
Yes. Well, I was famous as a prodigy.
Yes.
I had no competition, so everybody knew of me. They were happy to hear me, and they were satisfied. And I don't think that Rachmaninoff was so happy about that. So,
yes.
We moved eventually back to Paris, where I was studying under Mr. Courteau at the time. And my father received a telephone call from Mr. Rachmaninoff, and he asked my father to bring me to play for him. Because at that time, he was living in his place in Switzerland, and he practiced many, many hours every day. And his wife was not well. And so, in order to be able to practice the number of hours he felt necessary, he rented a place in the Villa Majestique in Paris. He had relatives in Paris, so he felt at home in Paris. And every weekend, he went home to his wife and didn't touch the piano so he could be with her. And then Sunday nights, come back to Paris and work all week. And he asked my father to bring me to him at the Villa Majestique in Paris. And so my father came in and told me at my practice room, on Wednesday, you're going to play for Sergei Rachmaninoff. And I thought, oh no, not me, because I had heard him play in Berlin when I was even younger, before we ever went to Paris. We lived in Berlin, and I heard him playing with the Berlin Philharmonic, and he was a great master, and I knew he was a great master, and I was just a kid studying, and I realized I was nothing. And my father said, well, you better choose the best piece you can, because he asked to hear you play. And we went to the Villa Majestique. And when we got off the elevator, I could hear the slow, careful practice. And I thought, my, he has a slow student. Then we rang the bell. The practicing stopped. And I thought, well, I think maybe that's him practicing slowly, not a student. And he was very tall. He came to the door. He had his shirt sleeves on. And he extended his hand with his long finger. He pointed way down at me, and he said, you mean that plays the piano? And I was just shaking and being referred to as that made me a little quivery. My father gave me a good push to get me inside the door. And Mr. Rachmaninoff saw me quivering there. And he sat me on a seat, and he took from his wallet a picture. He said, you see this lake here? I have a boat. See this boat? I can go on this boat, and I can press a button, and the boat goes all over this lake. And I started to laugh because I thought that would be fun.
And now, Ruth, you seem to be the last living pupil of Rachmaninoff. But after all this spectacular success in your career, when you were a child prodigy and had enormous concert career, you decided to suddenly to withdraw from the concert stage.
I did not want to work so hard. If it takes all that time, every single hour of the day, between 8 and 9 hours every single day, just sitting and practicing, this is not the way I wanted to spend my time. I wanted to be a college girl. I wanted to go to school and learn other things. If I'm not good enough at playing the piano, 2 or 3 hours a day, I'll teach piano to little kids and I'll be all right. I don't need to play concerts and try so hard and work so hard. It's too much work. I did not want to do it. I looked for ways to leave my home.
It's great that you resumed your career in the 50s and recorded all the wonderful legacy of music, 10 CDs published by Decca in the 60s. But it's one thing that I wanted to ask you about is your meeting with Arthur Rubinstein. As I know, it was a very amusing story. How did you meet him? And is it true that you played an etude of Chopin to him?
The way I met Mr. Rubinstein was we were both invited when I was a child in Paris to the home of the Baroness de Rothschild, Baroness Edward de Rothschild. On her Sunday afternoon, she had musicales at her house on the Rue Saint-Florentin. And he and I were both invited to participate. And he looked at my hand once when I was little, and my hand is shaped square. It is just as wide across as it is down. And he says, "This is a fine pianist's hand. You will be a fine pianist." And I remembered him very well for saying this to me. And he remembered me also. And so at one point, I did not know if I should continue teaching or take a job with Arthur Fiedler as a pianist, as a soloist with the Boston Orchestra and go on tour with him. So I thought maybe Mr. Rubinstein would tell me. He would tell me if I'm good enough or not. So I wrote to him. He was living in Southern California. I was in Northern California. I said, if you can, would you just listen to me play and let me know if I'm good enough to be a pianist? And he did. And that's when he asked me, can you play this? Can you play that? Can you play this? I said, yes. Can you play this Chopin etude? I said, yes, I play all the etudes. And he asked for different ones and I could play them, of course. I worked on them every morning. And so he said, can you play this Mozart sonata? Yes. Can you play a Beethoven sonata? Yes. Can you play some Debussy? Yes. He had me playing for him for about 4 hours. And then he said, what can I do for you? So I said, you can tell me, should I quit my teaching job in order to take a job playing professional piano with Arthur Fiedler? Because if I take this job with Arthur Fiedler, I can't keep my teaching job, and that's how I support myself. And he said, you can quit your teaching job. After 10 concerts, you won't want to teach anymore. But I am still teaching, and I'm still playing the piano.
And you are still active and you have just signed a contract with Decca, so you are back in the business, we can say, and start a new chapter of your career that we are very happy to hear. So for the end, could you tell us what would be your next recording after this solo recital that you would like to record for Decca?
I don't really know, but I am working all the time on music that I have not played before. Perhaps it will include something by César Franck, because it is an important César Franck here next year. That's all I can say.
So, wishing you all the best. We are looking forward to listening to your new CD and to your next recording and to listening to you on a concert platform, hopefully in Poland too. Thank you for this interview, Ruth. It was a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, really.
It was my pleasure also.